Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
We're being joined live from the United Kingdom today. Rupert Sheldrake is a celebrated biologist and author, best known for his theory of morphic field and morphic resonance, something many of our listeners are very aware of. And it's a vision of a living, developing universe with its own inherent memory. His most recent book, Science Set Free in the U.S., won the Book of the Year award from the British Scientific and Medical Network, The Independent. In its review, wrote, Sheldrake drags 10 of the most powerful dogmas out of the basement and into the light of day, and does science, humanity, and the world at large a considerable favor. Let me start with that particular topic, if I could. Rupert, welcome to the show. Our audience is very familiar with your work, especially as they said on the internet, quote unquote, the banned TED Talk. Rupert Sheldrake's TED Talk gets pulled for, in my understanding after watching it, for exposing the big, I don't want to say big brother, but perhaps the old brothers, old boys club dealing with empirical science. What was your message to humanity you were trying to convey in that particular talk?
I was trying to show that the established views, the established assumptions in science are just that, they're assumptions. And if you look at these 10 central dogmas in science, these assumptions that are taken to be true by most people, they actually don't work out very well in terms of science itself, that science has grown out of these assumptions that were all laid down between the 17th and the 19th century. We've grown out of them. And my point was to show that as science bursts out of this dogmatic framework, it'll get much more interesting, much more exciting, and much more fun.
And it seems to be getting much more fun. I'm meeting and interviewing so many wonderful people in the realms of alternative science, alternative physics, alternative archaeology, and they all seem to feel the same as you do, that there seems to be perhaps a constraint of what is suitable information that is going to be released to the public. What are your thoughts on the idea that perhaps like I mentioned earlier, the Old Boys Club is withholding information that not only will make science more exciting, but perhaps empower humanity as a whole having this information?
Well, I don't think the information's being withheld exactly. I mean, for example, 96% of the universe is now thought to consist of dark matter and dark energy. That information is very freely available. But what it shows is that regular physics and chemistry and biology are actually only dealing with 4% of the reality that science itself says is there. So to have 96% of reality utterly unknown to us, whose nature is completely obscure, and yet shaping the world we live in, this is rather an interesting discovery for the sciences to make. So it's not really that the information's withheld, it's that the significance of it perhaps isn't seen as well as it could be. Likewise, the idea of the universe is evolutionary is very widely known. The Big Bang Theory, the expanding universe, we live in an evolutionary universe. So that information is very widely known, but still most scientists assume the universe is governed by fixed laws that were all there at the moment of the Big Bang, and that all the matter and energy in the universe came into being in a single instant at the beginning. Now, these are assumptions, and they don't really fit with the evolutionary view that's now so widespread. So it's really a matter of thinking through the information that we have and seeing it in a new way. And when you do that, the world looks very different.
Very much so. And so are you suggesting that perhaps the scientific laws that we are taking for granted as being there at the beginning are actually more fluid and they themselves are evolutionary?
Yes. In fact, I'm suggesting they're not really laws at all. They're more like habits. Law is a very anthropocentric metaphor, and it's only a metaphor after all. No one's ever met a scientific law. You don't actually encounter them in outer space or anything. We infer that they're there, and actually it makes more sense to think of the universe having habits and a kind of memory. So, yes, that is what I'm saying.
Wonderful. And I couldn't agree with you more. One of the reasons I find today's show very exciting for me myself is the fact that I have a scientist and a theologian joining together to speak about something as perhaps as abstract as the concept of angels. Could you? And I know this is if I'm not mistaken, your new book, The Physics of Angels, Exploring the Realm Where Science and Spirit Meet, is a new edition, or a more modern edition, perhaps. Could you tell us a little bit, Rupert, what brought you two together to talk on this particular topic?
Well, first of all, whenever I get together with Matt, we have a lot of fun. I find I can talk completely freely with him on almost anything that I want to talk about, and that's a very rare pleasure. It's not usually as easy to do that with scientists, or indeed with theologians or philosophers. So we were able to discuss these things. We were doing this whole series of discussions which appear in another book of ours called Natural Grace, Dialogues on Science and Spirituality. And we got interested in the whole question of what angels are and how one can make sense of angels in this modern universe that we live in. Because in some ways they look like sort of hangovers from a mythological past. In other ways, they appear as intensely personal experiences from people who feel they've been guided by angels or seen angels. And yet there's a whole tradition of angels in Western thought, which Matthew knew much more about than me, because he's a theologian and a historian of theology. And it seemed a wonderful opportunity to explore this together.
And Matthew, if I could bring you on the show, and welcome to our show today, Matthew Fox. It's a pleasure to have you here. What is your feeling of working as a theologian, discussing these types of matters with a scientist like Rupert Sheldrake?
Well, it's a pleasure, as he says, and it's an honor. I really respect Rupert's work, and I respect his courage that's behind the work, including the courage of the questions that he poses that many scientists are too self-conscious to even entertain. And I learn so much from Rupert, and so it's a very fruitful dialogue when we get together, as we have on numerous occasions. For example, just one lesson I learned from Rupert that I did not know about angels is that Darwin's right-hand man, who really developed the theory of evolution with him, a man named Wallace, and Rupert can tell you more about him. Both of them were natural scientists. He broke with Darwin precisely over the question of angels, that is to say, of intelligences that helped to steer evolution. Darwin ended up saying it was all blind chance, but Wallace said no, there must have been some intellectual beings that have been involved in this process of evolution. Otherwise, these amazing happenings could not have occurred in so short a time. So just that one example, and Rupert can certainly flesh that out, was a complete revelation to me, and of course it is to anyone, because our science books don't mention Wallace. He got none of the attention that Darwin did, and again, Rupert can explain why that is so. But that's just one example of a revelation that came my way. Another is, of course, Rupert's response to Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century theologian, who wrote extensively about angels and was a genius without any question. But Rupert says that if you substitute the word quanta for angels, you're in the same ballpark with what Aquinas is talking about. So I think it's quite stunning also that 21st century postmodern science is talking in terms that are recognizable from a pre-modern philosophy. Again, Rupert can fill this out, but those are just two of the astounding lessons that I learned when we were doing this book together.
Wow. Quanta, and that is the term that they use for angel. Is that what you were saying?
Well, they did quote what Aquinas at one point Aquinas is discussing how angels move, and it's not the kind of thing most people think about in the modern world. And what's so interesting about it, you see, is he says that angels move from one place to another because they act, and angels are known through their action. You wouldn't know they were there if it wasn't for their action. And when they act, the whole angel acts in a place. You can't get part of an angel acting or acting with part of its being. You get the full scale of action. The whole angel acts as a unit. Well, that's the definition of a quantum. The quantum is defined as the quantum of action. The whole of quantum theory is based on quanta, and quanta are defined as quanta of action. And when he's talking about how they move from one place to another, he said they stop acting in one place and start acting in another, and they move between them. But from the point of view of the angel itself, when they're moving between one place and another, no time elapses, because an angel has no sense of time elapsing in its own being. But from the point of view of an external observer, the time might elapse between it leaving one place and turning up in another. Now, that's exactly the discussion that Einstein had about the nature of light, the quanta of light. Einstein had a thought experiment where he imagined running along and sort of jumping onto a moving quantum of light. But from the point of view of the moving photon or quantum of light, no time elapses. It leaves the sun, and 8 minutes later, the quantum of light can act on something here on Earth. From the point of view of an external observer, it's taken 8 minutes to get from the sun to the Earth. But from the point of view of the quantum of light, it hasn't taken any time at all. Now, that is one of the most paradoxical features of quantum theory. And to find an exact parallel for that discussion in Aquinas was, for me, mind-blowing. It's what, in fact, caused us to entitle the book The Physics of Angels. Most of it isn't about what one could call physics, but that was a particularly striking instance.
And it's very interesting because I myself am a metaphysical student, for lack of a better term, or philosopher, and I can't help but feel that one of the greatest, how shall we say, I don't know if we want to use the word debate or divisive ideas, is the idea of bridging spirituality and or divinity with science. And I feel that now that we are discovering this realm of quantum physics, or the quantum realm as we're discussing, that perhaps there is a chance to kind of erase that line, or at least blur it a little. What are your thoughts, Rupert, on the idea of perhaps quantum science to explain? We talk about the God particle quite a bit in science. What are your hopes, and what have you seen?
Well, I think the main importance of quantum theory is that it's made us realize that matter is not stuff, like little billiard balls enduring stuff, but matter is a process. And an electron, an atom, and so forth are processes. They take time. If an electron is a wave, which it is, then it takes time for a wave to wave. You can't have an electron at an instant, nor can you have it at a particular point. I mean, think of a wave on the ocean, because it's the easiest way of our seeing waves directly. If you slice it down and you just have a tiny fraction of time and space, and you get a tiny little bit of a wave, in a particular place at a particular time. You have no way of knowing what its wavelength is or anything about the wave. You have to let time elapse to know that a wave is a wave. And this means that matter is a process. That means it has a future and a past pole. And what's interesting about that is that the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead in the 1920s was the first serious philosopher to grasp the importance of quantum theory. And he realized the fact that even an electron has a future and a past gives us a new way of thinking about the relationship of mind and body. The mind is essentially the future pole, and the body is the past pole. Mostly people think of the relation of mind and body in terms of space, the inner life, the outer world, and so forth. But Whitehead said the relationship is in time. Even an electron has a future pole which consists of possibilities. The Schrödinger wave equation in quantum theory tells you all the possible things the electron could do. But when it interacts with something, it does one of those possible things and not the others. And when it's done it, you can measure it. Now it's now in the past, and you can find its physical being through this measurement. But now a whole realm of future possibility opens up. I think the reason this makes it easier to understand what the relationship of God to the universe might be is that God's mind, God's conscious mind, God is essentially to do with consciousness as well as activity and movement and change and purpose. This shows us a way in which a kind of mental aspect exists even in the level of the electron. It certainly exists in our own minds. I think there's a mental aspect to all self-organizing systems, and that mental pole is the one that most clearly relates to the divine being. The standard scientific view of materialist science treats the entire universe and all matter as totally unconscious. And then some liberal materialists say, okay, well, if you want to have a designing intelligence at the beginning, you could have a God who frames the laws of nature and fine-tunes the constants and then pushes the start button for the Big Bang and then sort of retires. But that takes consciousness totally out of the universe. It becomes a kind of optional extra. Whereas if there's a kind of mental pole in all things at all levels of the universe, as quantum theory implies, and as modern ideas about consciousness throughout nature also support, then we have an interface with the world of consciousness and indeed the different aspects of consciousness in the universe all through. And the point about angels is that they are conscious beings. We don't just have to think in terms of a universe with living matter and evolving an evolving universe that relates simply to the divine mind, but one which has every level of consciousness in between God and the lowliest aspects of nature. And in traditional cosmologies, the kind that Matthew Fox and I discuss in this book, The Physics of Angels, there's this kind of levels of consciousness governing the universe at all levels, and that's why it's so relevant and interesting, I think, in the modern world.
Very, very much so, and I have to ask you, and I know we're running out of time with you, Rupert. Perhaps you would share with us your idea of what angels are. And I'm glad you answered the fact that they have consciousness. That was going to be one of my questions. And of course, I'll follow up more with Matthew when you depart the show. But I'm very curious as a scientist how you conceptualize what an angel is compared to what the throughout history, you know, we have been told what angels are, whether it be through the Judeo-Christian Bible or other types of mythology and the religious texts. Is it similar to what we have been shown through these books, or do you have a particular concept that you align with?
Well, there's 9 different levels of angels according to the traditional classifications, which we discuss in our book. And the top 3 levels I think of more like kind of cosmic archetypes. cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. The cherubim are the angels of divine knowledge, the seraphim the angels of divine love, and the thrones the angels of the divine presence. And these are consciousnesses of God's presence or God's love or God's knowledge, which are kind of archetypes that apply to the whole universe. And so I'd see these as kind of archetypal forms of consciousness which influence everything within the universe. Then there's a lower level of angels and dominions, virtues, and powers, which are traditionally associated with the celestial realms, the heavens. Well, the heavens really are about the sky and the universe. And the easiest way to conceive of some of those kinds of intelligence is to think of the stars. I think that the stars, the sun and the other stars, are conscious beings. I think all self-organizing systems in the universe have a mental pole, as I was saying earlier. So the consciousness of the sun and the higher mind of the sun, that part of it which relates to the divine consciousness, the consciousness in the whole universe, one could think of as a kind of intelligence of the sun that's associated with the body of the sun. The sun is a celestial body. So the guiding intelligence of the sun, you could think of as the angel of the sun, the angelic intelligence of the sun. So I think that the stars, when I look at the sky now, I see the stars as conscious beings, and each one subject to a kind of intelligent guidance, not just for the star itself, but for the solar system associated with it, because many of the stars have solar systems, not the same as ours, but their own kinds of solar system.
Yes.
And then the entire galaxy could well be conscious and have a guiding spirit or intelligence for the entire galaxy. So there could be, for each galaxy, a kind of galactic angel, which is another way of putting the idea of a guiding and creative intelligence working in and through that galaxy. Then when we come to the Earth, there are the different regions of Earth, different kinds of species and animals and plants, different terrestrial phenomena like the Earth's core, the Earth's magnetic field, the ionosphere. All of these, traditionally in science, in materialist science, are just seen as physical processes with no consciousness or intelligence. But if we see them as having a kind of mental aspect, then each of them could have a kind of guiding intelligence associated with it. And again, we'd have a whole realm of angelic intelligence at work in the Earth through the various phenomena of the Earth. And then, as Matthew was saying just now, the evolutionary biologist Alfred Russel Wallace, a contemporary of Darwin's, who, like Darwin, developed the theory of evolution by natural selection, thought that evolution was actually guided by innumerable angelic intelligences here on Earth. And that is a very remarkable view when you think about it. This man is right up there in the pantheon of science as one of the great innovators. And he had such a different view from Darwin about evolution, but it makes, I think, more sense than Darwin's view, because Darwin's view doesn't really explain the creativity of living organisms. His natural selection theory just explains how ones that don't work very well get weeded out, but it doesn't really explain how new kinds of organisms originate in the first place, or how the kind of intelligent adaptation that organisms show to their environment takes place, and how the creativity inherent in life takes place. So I think all of this leaves scope for intelligence, not necessarily intelligence in the sense of intelligent design, which I don't like that idea, because it implies a kind of engineering God or mind outside nature. These angels are operating within nature. They're within the natural world, within the universe.
Absolutely beautiful, and I couldn't agree more. I have about 10 more questions I'd like to add on, but I know you have to leave us, and we are getting ready to come up on our commercial break here at the bottom of the hour. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Rupert Sheldrake. And I was wondering if there's any last words you'd like to give to our listeners. What's the next step?
Well, I think the big challenge in science now is to explore how we understand nature, a nature permeated by consciousness, rather than the old materialist view of a dead, unconscious universe. And that is the challenge for the science of the 21st century.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.